Hi, everybody. Henry A.J. Ramos here, the Chief Curator and Artistic Director at Studios on the Park in beautiful downtown Paso Robles. I am indeed honored today to have my friend and colleague Sean Carrillo online with us. He's going to tell us about our coming show on Chicano photography, Rediscover Chicano photography, and we're going to jump into a lot of fascinating questions about not only the history, but the continuing relevance of this work. And Sean has essentially curated this show in close partnership and collaboration with us at Studios. And Sean, we're just so thrilled to not only have you online, but to have the benefit of your incredible partnership. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm
Looking good.
2,000 miles away and I'm amazed at this technology.
Yeah, it's crazy. This is the kind of the new norm now. Yeah, Sean is beaming in, as we should say, from New York City, where he lives and works. But Sean, going back to your incipiency, you're a homeboy from East Los Angeles. You grew up in the neighborhoods that produced a lot of the informative art of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s and beyond in our community. And I'm sure our audience would love to know a little bit more about your formative experiences and what kind of compelled you to become a creative person. And I should say before you get started that you have a multiplicity of disciplines that you work in. You are a person who has done paintings, you've done installations, you have done incredible fashion art, and for our purposes, you're a phenomenal photographer. So tell us how you evolved in all those different directions.
It's very easy. Just meet Harry Gamboa and Gronk when you're about 18 or 19 years old, and
Amazing.
then just do like they do, and you'll be fine.
Tell us about who those people were, because a lot of our audience may not be familiar with the Harrys and the Gronks, the Willie Herons and the Patsy Valdezes that were your partners in crime, if you might say, back in the day.
Absolutely, and more importantly, mentors. So back when I was in college at Cal State LA, I had the great good fortune to meet Harry Gamboa and Gronk, who were both on campus at the time. And they introduced me to their colleagues, Willie Heron and Patsy Valdez. The four of them created an art group called ASCO, which began, I believe, in the early 70s when they were all in high school. That was its formative period. And then went on to create some very important and iconic works, including installations and performance art during a period when there was also a lot of political awakening within the Chicano community.
Mhm.
So it was concurrent with the moratoriums, the walkouts, and of course the tragic events that took place at the park when Ruben Salazar, the LA Times journalist, was killed.
Mhm.
So against that backdrop, they formed this art collective. It's not really a collective, though; it's a group, um,
Mhm.
better said. And and then when I met Harry and Grunk, when they were at Cal State LA, and I was a youngster, they asked myself, my friends Teresa Covarrubias, Daniel Villarreal, to help them in expanding the group and doing a more uh, a larger, more holistic, inclusive kind of theater type performances, no longer just on the street,
Fascinating.
no longer, let's say, guerrilla theater, but in fact, uh, put within the context of a theater setting.
Mhm.
And so lots of people like myself, Daniel, as I mentioned,
Mhm.
Marisa La Norte, Marisa Leal, Consuelo Flores, Armando Norte, Robert Beltran, Maria Elena Gaitan, we all
Wow.
jumped in
It's like a
and
hall of
began.
fame that you just listed. It's incredible, the
Yeah, we all
potency of
began
all those creatives.
to create this kind of traveling circus, if you will.
It's almost like a Chicano Bauhaus. I mean, in some measure, just the iconic figures coming together at one moment in history to just create incredible stuff. And for audience members that don't really understand the vernacular, the term Chicano or Chicana is effectively a political statement of sorts by the young generation of Mexican Americans who were largely working class, growing up in places like East Los Angeles, and sort of challenging the notion that when they would look at the walls of what was happening at the LA County Museum, or when they would look at the major media and film or fashion or other places, they really didn't see themselves. And you kind of were very formative in shaping what I would call the original Latinx identity in popular culture. Would you agree with that assessment?
Well, for sure, I would give that credit to Harry and Gronk and their establishing the theory of the no movie, which
Hmm.
has, can be looked up, but there are political ramifications to that as well as aesthetic.
Hmm.
Um, and it really had to do with what you just mentioned, which is not seeing yourself reflected back on the screen coming from major media. And that dearth um, created this uh, idea that we could create our own, and so that's what we did.
It's amazing. And even though a lot of the influences and impulses were geared to political and economic empowerment, really much of our focus and much of the focus of the time was on these really kind of new expressions and everything from music to fashion to street art, art in general. And in our context for the show that you've helped to mount, we call it counter narrative in some measure precisely to address the issues that you just spoke to. And what's great about this show, I think, that I'd love you to speak to, Sean, is that we have in the Mexican American and Latinx communities some really renowned photography figures. I mean, you mentioned Harry Gamboa being one of them, but George Rodriguez, Laura Aguilar. We have some people that have been world class, published, authors of the work. Your work and that of Daniel Villarreal's and Marisela Norte, who we feature on this show, is also, I believe, really world class. But it's only recently been discovered in some respects in terms of the academy, in terms of the museum and cultural, class. Say more about that.
Well, that's very true because, in a way, each of us that are involved in this show took different career paths um, prior to how we got to where we are today.
Hmm.
So, for instance, Daniel Villarreal was an actor in Hollywood who began his career on the film Stand and Deliver.
One of the
And I
iconic
worked on that film,
Chicano films of all time.
right, which is
Yeah.
an iconic film, a great story.
Hmm.
And Ramon Menendez, the director, brought it to life. And it's a really important film. I mean, I think you could watch that movie any year. It's been out over 30 years, I believe, and you
Hmm.
could watch it any year and it
It's,
still holds true. Everything, unfortunately, some of the more negative aspects still hold true in that
mhm.
there's a systemic racism that exists, which means that people in Chicano communities or communities of color are looked upon differently when they excel, when they do well, when their test scores
Mhm.
are high. There's immediate
Mhm.
suspicion. So that's an important an important issue even today. Um,
Yes.
and then Marisela Norte, oh, well, I should finish up with Daniel. Daniel went on to do many other films, including Speed and all kinds of other stuff.
American Me was one
Yeah,
of them, another one with Edward James Olmos.
yep. And I remember watching for a while, every time I turned on the TV, I saw Daniel. He was on Miami Vice and
Exactly.
all the cop shows and all that. So he had a great career as an actor, and now he's working behind the scenes and behind the cameras and still working in the industry.
Right.
Marisela took the writing route, and I became a fan of hers the first time I heard her read, and that was around 1981 or 82, and just blown away. She's an incredible writer. She's extremely talented,
Hmm.
and when she reads her own work, if you ask me, very much like another LA author, Wanda Coleman. It's just
Hmm.
profound. The
Yes.
impact when they read their own work is
Hmm.
tremendous.
And Maricela is
Maris,
principally known as a poet,
a
although
poet and
she
a
is a
writer.
writer. But
Yep,
people refer to her as the kind of unofficial poet laureate of East Los Angeles. I mean, she's
that's true.
renowned in the sense of having a iconic standing in that community and beyond, right?
She does. And she's been recognized all over the world. It's funny, not so much in LA or in this country, but I've read about her in magazines in London. She's been
Hmm.
featured, in the Atlantic magazine. I mean, her work is sincere and profound and important. But like many artists, we don't often find the same reception back home,
Hmm.
or it takes a while,
Yeah.
and that's okay too. Sometimes it takes people a while to catch up.
Well,
And myself, I did the same thing. I was doing writing, I was doing visual art, I was doing videos, and I began actually in photography. right around the same time Daniel did. He beat me a little bit.
Interesting.
Um, but Daniel also started, in an interesting side note, with Laura Aguilar. They were classmates at
I did
East
not know
LA
that they were
College.
contemporaries. I thought she might have
Yep,
been a
yep,
slight bit older than him.
yep. And they were contemporaries, and they were friends, and they were classmates. So
Wow.
we inform each other's work, and to me, that's one of the main things I would want to convey about this show is that Maricela, Daniel, and myself, in addition to using photography as a creative medium, we've also been friends for a long time, over
That's
30
awesome.
years.
Wow.
And we influence each other in the same way that artists from different groups, if you want to say the Dadaists, the Surrealists, the pop
Exactly.
artists,
It's very
whomever,
analogous.
there's a
Yeah.
reason why they're friends. There's a
Hmm.
reason why they cling together because they have a shared sensibility. And
Hmm.
that's what I wanted to bring out in this exhibition.
So say more about that because it really does really both represent the broad panorama of the period we're looking at, which is 1980 to the present. But at the same time, to your point, there's a remarkable coherence and logical through line throughout the works that you selected. So tell us a little bit more about what informed those selections and
Sure.
what you think it sums to.
With Daniel and myself, I took the early period because that's when we began photographing. And so little of that period has been documented
Yes,
because
yeah.
there weren't that many people around. Number
Mhm,
one, there
mhm.
weren't that many people on the scene with cameras. Um, Myself, Daniel, Diane Gamboa, um, a few others,
So
but
just a
not that
handful of
many
you were out there documenting back in the day.
documenting it.
Yeah,
Right. So that's
exactly.
why I started there. What I like to say is at the beginning for us because we were kids. We were 19,
We were literally
18.
babies. I mean, yeah, 18, 19-year-olds. It's crazy to think about that now.
Yeah, yeah. And we had the great good fortune to meet Harry and Gronk and Willie and Patsy, and to be invited to join their traveling group of minstrels. And and then we were also involved in our own stuff. So Daniel was involved in the music scene, documenting it. I was involved in the music scene. I was doing sound and lighting and shows and flyers and whatever was needed,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
uh, aid and assist that, small group of individuals who were in East LA, the Brat, the Undertakers, the various groups that were there making music.
The
We were
Chicano
there. We were there at
avant-garde.
the shows, and we had cameras.
Yeah, and that's amazing that you had the instinct to actually document that work. And I do want to say that a lot of audience members who fall outside of the Mexican American or Chicano experience will not fully appreciate the way that maybe they should just the long tradition of musical influences that came out of East LA, going back to Richie Valens and Los Lobos, and of the groups that you talked about in between. And what's interesting is that that music was really, for all intents, it was punk rock and alternative rock. It wasn't really kind of music that you would probably logically associate with the Latinx experience. So say more about what that was all about. It was an exciting and robust time for that creativity, right?
Absolutely. And that's essentially, again, another part of the show that I think is important, which is, you know, we are all Chicanos who are involved in this show, but it doesn't mean that only Chicanos can appreciate this work.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
means that we have something to contribute to the greater canon of art by showcasing these photographs, by documenting the scenes that we were involved in. These are important historical documents. I mean, if nothing else, if not aesthetically, I happen to think that Marisela and Daniel are also amazing photographers.
I
So
agree. Yeah. No, and the way you've
I shouldn't
assembled.
even be in the show with them, but I
No, I
snuck
wouldn't
in.
go there. I think your works are foundational as well. But I do think that you've done a great service to help us get a really good survey of the breadth and depth of that work in terms of its quality, but also, as you suggest, to capture a moment in time that was pristine and just robust with creativity, and creativity that really, to the point of the term counter narrative, both spoke back to the larger culture, but also embraced many aspects of it in our own interpretation of that.
Absolutely. And counter narrative has a double meaning for me in regards to this show because, you could consider that Chicanos always have this idea that we live in two worlds, one
Hmm.
foot in the mainstream world and one foot in the Chicano culture. And that is true, obviously. But I always felt like there was a third alternative. And this is the point that I wanted to make in the show, which is Daniel, Maricela, myself, and our friends, we felt a little bit outsiderish even within the Chicano community.
Of course.
So so not only do you, let's say, feel maybe not so mainstream or too mainstream,
Mhm.
but then within the Chicano culture, we're not actually going to be completely involved in that many of those aspects as well.
Well, we'll say more about that. Was that simply because you had the audacity to kind of get outside of the box of what the community felt most comfortable representing? You really didn't bring necessarily a bilingualism to the work. You were all kind of operating in kind of an English speaking context, which isn't to say you left a language, but you were mostly kind of not in the box, if you will, that a lot of our people felt comfortable to live in because it was a more militant or more ethnocentric statement. You actually ventured into a never never land of being something ill defined or undefined.
Right. I agree. And that's well said. Maybe because growing up in East LA and growing up feeling very much a part of the city of Los Angeles,
Hmm.
I didn't actually feel like I had any restrictions onto where I could go, what I could do, who I should be
Hmm.
friends with, what I should be interested in. And so what you end up with is a cultural moment where people are more free, more open,
Exactly.
I think. And Daniel and I shared that sensibility. And of course, when we met Maricela, I mean, if you look at her work, let's just take, for instance, Maricela's,
Hmm.
you can see the influences of French New Wave films. You
Definitely.
can see the influence of the golden age of Mexican cinema in her
Hmm.
photographs.
Hmm.
As well, you can see her words brought to life,
Yes.
made visual
Yeah, it's beautiful.
because of her point of view, her knife-like precision in describing the people that she sees every day riding
Hmm.
on the bus in
Hmm.
in LA. It's one thing that's if you research Maricela Norte, you realize that she doesn't drive, and
It's
so
fascinating,
she
right? She's on the
she
bus,
is
she's
one of
taking
the few
public
people.
transit.
There's
Yeah.
probably two or three in Los
In
Angeles
Los Angeles,
who
yeah.
do not drive.
Yeah.
She doesn't drive in a city where driving is absolutely required, and
Hmm.
yet she doesn't. In a way, she's like a transportational punk rock,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
she's just going to do it her way.
It's
But
beautiful.
what that gives us, if you step aside from that, is a vantage point that is absolutely unique. And she has the capacity to put into words and now into pictures what she sees from that vantage point, from those
Hmm.
bus windows,
Yeah.
and by walking the streets and by living in the city.
Hmm.
All of us who lived in LA or live in LA today, we say we live there, but how much time do we spend on the street? Not
Very,
many
very
people walk
little.
on the street.
Very little.
Maricela does,
Yeah. And she's
and she
observing,
photographs it.
absorbing the whole thing as she's doing that, right? You
Absolutely.
can see that in the work. She's so in
Yep.
touch. That's really helpful. Well, let me ask you finally, as we begin to wrap, what is it that you think audiences, particularly those that might not be familiar with this particular genre, should be looking to understand the work, and how can people learn from it? What is the essential message you think that spans the test of time from the early incipiency of the productions to the actual presentation in our gallery?
So I'm not a good teacher because I probably talk too much, but I do know that the images created by Daniel, created by Maricela and myself are important because they document something that isn't documented by others. In
Very
other
true.
words,
They're unique.
it's if you punch in Chicano photography on into Google, you're going to get 100 images or maybe 1,000 images of quinceañeras, tattoos, cholos, homeboys,
Hmm.
lowriders,
Hmm.
etc.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that imagery. It's all good. It's
Yes,
wonderful. It's iconography that has been associated with our culture for a long
correct.
time, but it's not all. And
Correct.
that's the point of the show,
Yes.
that there were
Powerful.
musicians, poets, painters, people who were, doing all kinds of things, and
Hmm.
that their creative
Hmm.
expression was maybe outside that box a little bit,
Exactly.
but certainly not not outside the box of Western culture. And
Yes.
that's the point about the show that I would
Yeah,
really like
no,
people
profoundly
to
stated.
enjoy.
Profoundly stated. This is kind of like our Harlem Renaissance or something equivalent to a movement that
I wouldn't
has,
go that far, but
well,
maybe, who
but that
knows?
has, I mean, it really, to your earlier points about the distinction, I think the work is really global in its significance. It's not myopic. It's actually something that speaks to a broader humanity. And I think that's why it carries such power and such weight and why we're so thrilled to have the show. Well, Sean, you've been so generous with your contributions and certainly your analysis to help us put this show in context in this interview. We look forward to working with you more fully going forward, and we're very excited to share this show with our audience. So those of you who have an opportunity to get to Studios on the Park to see it, please do so. You won't want to miss it. Sean Carrillo, the man of the season, the man of all time. Thank you for all your contributions. Any last thoughts do you want to share with our audience?
That's all. I just hope people enjoy the show. Take a look at it. I hope it stirs thoughts and ideas, maybe, and that you share it with friends.
There you go. Over and out. Until next time.